we're actually going to talk about the TR Center's digital library itself. Show of hands, how many of you have been to our digital library before? Pretty big chunk of the audience. That's what I like to see. For those of you that haven't, or those that have and want an easy way to get to it, there's actually a QR code on the back of your name tag that you can scan with your phone camera, and it'll take you right to our digital library. My friend Jim Fugly down here in the front row just told me before we got started that he thinks he's been to the website about 176 times, and he's found what he's looking for almost every time. So that's what I really like to hear. We just hit a huge publishing milestone. We have published more than 90,000 items to this digital library. Thank you. Thank you. And that is thanks to the work of primarily my colleagues here, Erik Johnson and Kelly Hyland, as well as Gemma Kuntz, who is a remote cataloger as well. So thank you to those guys for pushing those things through. Those documents, those things we have on the website are letters, they're films, they're audio recordings, they're photographs, they're stereographs, political cartoons, almost anything you can think of. So what we're going to do today is talk a little bit about how those materials got to be in our digital library, and then we're going to do a little live demonstration of that library for you and show you how to use it. So, with that, I am actually going to move over to the table and talk a little about this PowerPoint here. If I can get the clicker to click. Slow mo. Slight technical difficulty. Give us just a moment here, and then we will be ready to go. Oh, my microphone is not on. How about now? Ah, there we go. All right, so I think this is gonna go now, maybe? No, not quite. Oh, wait. So now can I go back? Sorry about this, folks. These things happen. A lot of moving parts here on the day. Ah, there we go. All right, I think I am ready to go now. So, will one of you watch time for me a little bit? All right. So, we're going to talk about how historic documents have been created, collected, preserved, copied, digitized, and promoted, and the whole sort of life cycle that these historic records go through, and how these things might get from Theodore Roosevelt's desk to yours. Now, the first thing to keep in mind is that Theodore Roosevelt was a prolific writer, and I don't use those words sort of casually. He wrote about 150,000 letters over the course of his life. He wrote 35 or 40 books, depending on how you count them. We have sort of an ongoing debate over different volumes and editions and what have you, how you count them. Dozens and dozens of magazine and newspaper articles, diary entries, so on and so forth. This man was always writing from the time he learned to the very day that he died, January 6, 1919. So there's a lot of materials to get digitized and promoted. So, again, we'll talk a little bit about the records themselves. So, an interesting thing to note is that TR either never learned to type or typed very, very rarely, where we're not, or I'm not 100% sure at least. Generally, he either hand wrote things or dictated them to others. He hand wrote entire books. There's a fantastic image of him actually writing his book through the Brazilian wilderness, in the Brazilian wilderness. He hand wrote quite a few things. So the images you see here, the one there where he's looking up at his secretary, his presidential secretary, William Loeb Jr., who so tightly controlled access to the president's time that they called him Stonewall Loeb. And the other image you see here is the gun room at Sagamore Hill, his home in Oyster Bay, New York. And that was where he often wrote or dictated materials that he created. So this is just an example of one of his letters here. This is a 7-page letter to George Kennan, who is a journalist This is a letter about the Russo-Japanese War. The specific details aren't important, but just to show that these letters could go on, they could be quite lengthy. Some are even longer than this. I like this particular letter because the postscript is almost as long as the letter itself. Quite a long postscript after his signature there, which is pretty amusing. And he had a tendency to do that. He even had a tendency to write a lot of handwritten either corrections or entire new paragraphs and things into his letters. Now that is a copy of a letter, and that's an important thing to note about how these letters have been preserved over time. So especially anytime Theodore Roosevelt was in public office, these letters would be put into a letterpress copybook. So if you don't know about these, essentially you've got this big thick book and you've got a translucent sheet of paper and a wet blotter sheet, and you put the letter in and press these books down with this very strong press and create copies in a book. And that's where most of the letters we still have come from. Would that be accurate to say? Certainly during his years as president. Most of these that we have now that have been digitized are from the letterpress copybooks. Now these can be incomplete records because, like I said, he tended to handwrite corrections, and that's the version that would get mailed off, but those corrections might not make it into the letterpress copybook. But they're still really, really important to have. So, collecting the papers. Theodore Roosevelt was himself a historian. He wrote history books, and he was keenly aware of the importance of primary sources and of the information about his life to his legacy and to history as a whole. Now, he could have collected his papers a little more organized than he did, but in the later years of his life, he had 6 huge locked cases that he sends to the Library of Congress to hold for him and to eventually process. He at first does not want them processed for the public until after he dies. He will change his mind and allow a biographer to go in there. When the biographer gets to the Library of Congress, Joseph Buckland Bishop is his name, he finds these papers have not been worked on at all by the library. And George Putnam, the Librarian of Congress, says, Mr. Roosevelt, you did not send us the keys to these cases. And he says, Lord knows where the keys are. Break the cases open and get to work. And so that is the largest collection of his papers, is those that was sent to the Library of Congress. I talked about him not being as organized as perhaps he could have been in collecting his papers. You may notice in this image here from when he was the New York Police Commissioner, president of the Board of Commissioners, New York Police, that there's a huge pile of just papers, and his wastebasket is overflowing. The papers are just everywhere. He had a tendency when he read letters and documents to just toss each page to the floor as he went along. He would sometimes even tear pages out of magazines as he went along. Luckily he had secretaries like William Loeb and others who could help reorganize some of those documents as they made it to the floor. But yeah, he was not always the most organized man in many aspects of his life, actually. If we had time, we could talk about how bad he was with money, but that's another topic for another time. So the Library of Congress is not the only place that papers by and about Theodore Roosevelt are. There are collections all over the country. At Harvard Library is another really big collection. Theodore Roosevelt graduated from Harvard University, of course. The national park sites across the country have a lot of papers related to Theodore Roosevelt as well, either by him or about him. And we have collected those papers into our digital library as well, or at least some of them. We're always working on getting more. But so we are unifying papers from different collections under this digital umbrella in a way that no one else is doing. The Library of Congress, for example, just has their papers on their website. So, my text box got a little mixed up there. Microforming. So we want to talk about how these papers have come to get into digital form and how they've been preserved over time. So in the 1960s, the Library of Congress started microforming a lot of papers, and in particular presidential papers. They got some special funding to do that. And what microforming is a specialized camera will take a picture of these documents from above and reduce them X number of times, and so it turns out to be a very small piece of film. Many of you have probably used microfilm or microform viewers before. Those are a very safe and secure, stable, that's the word I'm looking for, a stable way to preserve historical documents. Paper degrades over time, but microfilm is pretty safe. And so that's a way that papers have been preserved for quite some time. So then, in recent decades, these microform papers have started to be digitized. They make specialized scanners to digitize these papers. That's what you see on that machine there is a microform digitization machine, so it actually is a sort of specialized scanner that gets these into the computer. You also see a much younger me in a picture there using another method of digitization, just an overhead camera taking a picture of. That's actually a circus route book there. That's a whole nother topic. That's a former life there. But so these papers are digitized in multiple ways and eventually will make their way to various digital libraries, including our own. And so, as I mentioned earlier, we've got over 90,000 items. People often ask us, when will it be done? And the answer is never. And the reason for that is, there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that the number of papers we have to get through just of TRs themselves is massive. TR, like I told you, wrote a whole lot of things. We're with the Library of Congress, which is the largest collection we're working with. We're through the presidential years now, is that right? And we're more or less, and we're moving on to the post-presidential African safari, things of that nature, is what we're working on at the moment. Is that correct?
There's still a few stragglers out there, but I think that would be more or less accurate to say.
Yeah. But even if someday we manage to digitize everything that Theodore Roosevelt himself ever wrote, we also collect papers of his immediate family, of his closest political allies and friends. We would love, for example, someday to ingest papers from Henry Cabot Lodge, a very close friend and political ally, people like that. So we want to use our digital library as a sort of starting point to discuss TR and the world he lived in and all of the people around him, and use TR as a lens, kind of like we're doing today for using him to study conservation and sustainability. Okay, so this slide here, I'm actually going to turn things over for just a moment to my colleague Kelly Hyland to tell you a little bit about what this map represents.
Yeah, is this on? Yes. This illustrates the majority of the places that hold the original records that are in our digital library. And so this, I think, is what makes the digital library we have so unique, what makes me so proud to work here. Without the digital library, you would have to go to every dot on that map and more to access the papers. So we kind of make it so that you can be anywhere. You can be in Dickinson, North Dakota. You can be in Hawaii if you want. Sounds like a nice place to go sometimes. And so research before the digital library, for example, that dot Washington, D.C., the Library of Congress, they have a lot of his papers, but then certain things that he wrote to his friend Henry Cabot Lodge are in Massachusetts. And so to get both ends of that correspondence, you would have to travel between the two. And so that's just one way that the digital library is kind of streamlining things and making it a lot easier to find what you need.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I do want to emphasize one of those points there, and that's linking these things together that once were together and have been separated over time. I think when we do our demonstration of the website, we're going to look at that a little with a character called Teddy Crombie. Is that right? We'll get to him. So we'll show you a little bit about what we mean when we talk about linking these items back together. That's something that's really important in my opinion. We also, I think it's important to note the accessibility of these to anyone and everyone in a way that was not the case before. So the resources it requires, right, to travel, the money and time, so on and so forth, to get to all of these places is something that a lot of people don't have. And so now anyone, anywhere in the world with an internet connection can get to these historic documents as we get them up. And that's something we're really proud of.
Yes, and just to add also, a few of those pins represent private collectors, and so you might not even know that those materials exist, and getting permission from private collectors to access things can be tricky. And so some of them have graciously allowed us to have have access to scans of their records. And so that's just another way that the digital library opens access to more of these materials for everybody.
Erik, would this be a good time to talk about the Myers collection? That would be a good transition, if that would be, wouldn't mind talking about that a little?
Oh dear, sure. So in addition to getting occasional scans of or digital scans of items, we've also occasionally been contacted by people who wish to give us physical items. We're not necessarily a collecting institution. We have some archival space, but our physical collections are relatively small, but they are growing. Recently, just this year, we were contacted by a woman in, I believe that dot is in North Carolina.
Yes.
Was that correct, Kelly?
Yes.
Yeah. Who contacted us and said that her grandfather was a sailor with the Great White Fleet, and that he had amassed a collection of postcards from his journey. She still had some of his souvenirs, had a Bible, had his hat, things like that, and they were very interested. They had these things in their family, but they wanted to help get those available to more people. They saw them as a valuable historic resource, and they wanted to make them widely available. They graciously were able to donate those to us. They are currently known as Charles C. Myers Collection, the name of her grandfather. We're currently in the process of getting those properly archivally rehoused. If you look in your program schedule, when we have the reception later this evening, in addition to the Presidential Library, talking about the Morris Collection, Kelly will be showing off some of our own things. She's gotten some of the postcards ready to show, just a sneak peek of that because we're still working on it. But we have those. We plan to digitize them. We plan to make a digital exhibit. And I think on the back of your program, it says the symposium next year is planned to be Theodore Roosevelt in the Navy. So we're really hoping to be able to use those massively next year. So a little bit of a teaser there.
And that's another, when William was saying earlier, we will never be done, it is because things like that are always popping up, things that we don't know about, that nobody knows about until someone is cleaning out an attic or a basement or decides that they want to make things available. And so there's always room to grow. And the nice thing about a digital library is that we have infinite room in the digital library to house and show all of these things, even if we don't get the physical items.
Fantastic, thank you guys. I was going to talk a little about cataloging. Again, my text box got kind of messed up here.
Something's going on
I don't know what happened with that. Oh well, these things happen. I'm not going to talk too long about this, but I do want to tell you a little bit about our sort of cataloging standards. We have very meticulous standards for metadata. If you don't know that word, that's the data about the data. So it's the creator, the writer of a letter, the recipient of a letter, the date it was written, the place, if that's relevant, all of this information. And we catalog this at item level. So what that means is every single individual letter, every single individual photograph, every item gets thoroughly cataloged with all of this detail. And that makes it a lot easier for people to find, and it makes it a lot easier for you to connect those things back together. And so we do have some very meticulous standards that we use for cataloging. We also have, this is not available to the public, at least not at this time, maybe someday in the future, but we have a known persons database where we track down every creator, recipient, or subject of a record, or at least attempt to track them down. There are currently roughly 25,000 people in this database, and that's growing every day. We use that in part for copyright purposes to make sure that we can publish these items. So we do a lot of this cataloging every single day. This is sort of the bulk of what we do. And so that's just an example of kind of the back end. That's kind of hard to see from where you are, but you can see we've got these fields in which we enter this data to help make these things accessible and understandable. We also describe each and every one of these items, so they will get a couple of sentences telling you what they are. This is a little what it looks like on the front end. I'm actually going to go ahead and move on from that quickly because we will be able to look at that live. And with that, we are going to move over to the computer here, and we're going to give you a little bit of a live demonstration of this library.
Yes, so this is the landing page when you come and visit us. We'll show you a little bit about how to search and give you some examples of some of the very unique resources that we have in our collection and some of the things that we do with that data. So Erik, do you want to start with a cartoon?
Sure.
one of the great things that we did is a few years ago we had Rick Marshall, the cartoonist expert, annotate some of these fields. I don't know how familiar many of you are with political cartoons, but they often are kind of a language in and of themselves. They're people that are represented, things that are represented that would have been obvious to people at the time that we today might not know. And so Rick started annotating them for us, so you don't get just the object and just the description that we have, because we are not cartoon experts. You get some of his commentary on it, and so it just adds another rich layer of information and understanding for people doing research. And so this is, we tried to do conservation-themed items, other than Teddy Crombie, who we will get to. So you can see the comments and context that Rick has added really adds a layer of detail and things that you wouldn't get just from the description, or if you were just happen to come across this cartoon, you might know, okay, it's the spirit of the forest, he's talking to Uncle Sam, but just the extra layer of detail is fantastic, and something that as a digital library we were able to add because we can add as many fields as we want or don't want with our metadata.
Right, especially for political cartoons when there are certain references that are being made or symbols that are being made that may not be as prominent today. Being able to fill those details back in through the use of annotations and things is really helpful to help people and researchers get a fuller sense of what is this item exactly expressing.
Yes, so Erik, if you want to go to the search, just to show how we add, in library talk, which I tend to speak a lot, so yell at me if I go too in the weeds. But we call them subject headings. They're kind of, keywords is a term that is more commonly used. This is how things are findable in our website. So when we were putting together this presentation, planning what we wanted to do, I went to the search bar up there and typed sustainability to try and find documents we have about that, conservation and sustainability as our topic. You notice, Erik, if you can scroll down, there aren't that many resources. So the thing about subject headings as opposed to keywords is they're kind of their own language. You have to know what you're looking for, but they are related. And so I think, Erik, I think it's the U.S. Forest Service.
Because we can tell that the U.S. Forest Service, although it may not have sustainability per se, we know it is related to sustainability.
Yes.
So by clicking into that, we can see what are the actual
Yes.
headings that are getting used.
Yes, and here's a blog post, and at the very top, you can see, well, maybe you can't, it's a little bit small, you can see that there are subjects, and so those are the things that this blog has been tagged with to find. And so you can see, oh, conservation of natural resources, that's the language that our library uses for that. And so you can click on that, actually, and you can see we have, I think it's, 341 results. And so that's a way that even if you don't know exactly what you're looking for, or you're looking for one thing, you can get led down as many rabbit trails as you want to go down, basically. The possibilities are endless. So anything you want to know, we probably have something about it. If you can't find it, we love to answer reference questions. You can email us, and we'll help you find it.
I should mention also, when I did the search earlier just in the search bar, that's the basic search. But when you get into the results here, you can see we've reached sort of a more advanced search. So right now, this was searching for the subject, conservation of natural resources. If I wanted to look for things, conservation of natural resources, back up, conservation of natural resources, specifically by Theodore Roosevelt, I could add that. And then the results, you see, so 206 of those 341 results were from Roosevelt writing about the conservation of natural resources. So that can kind of help narrow your search and get down to exactly what you're looking for.
Yes, and I think we have an example too, conservation themed, about how we can link related records and what that looks like and why that is so useful. And in my opinion, as a cataloger, what really adds the most value to this digital library as a resource. So Often we'll find in letters there will be just references to other letters. I think there was one letter I cataloged where it was just one sentence and he said, "Oh my gosh, I got your letter. I can't believe it." And so it's, what does that mean? What are you responding to? And so we were able, through some detective work, to link these records. That one I never did find because, you know, he was a demonstrative man sometimes. There was often things he couldn't believe or was reacting to like that. But that's not particularly useful to a researcher other than if you want to know, could Theodore Roosevelt believe something? Sometimes. But so in this example, we have a letter to Francis G. Newlands of the Newlands Reformation Act, Senator Newlands. Reclamation. Yes, sorry. And so he is enclosing a copy of a letter that he sent to Representative Burton. It kind of says, this is the outline, this is, starting the Inland Waterways Commission. But that letter, that might be useful to find. And they're not necessarily next to each other in the letterpress copybooks. It's from a different date. They're organized chronologically. And so what we have done is found that letter, and we are able to link it to this. And so it's over there as the first item on the related digital library records. So Erik, if you click on it, you can see it's a bit longer, but you can get a little bit more context. And so that kind of thing, that's a lot harder to do if you're researching in person or somewhere, because you might not know where that letter is, and it might take more time to track down.
And if I can expand on that, Kelly, if you continue looking over at the related digital library records, you'll see on the side here, letter from Theodore Roosevelt to John Hollis Bankhead, letter from Theodore Roosevelt to W.J. McGee. All these show a brief preview of the description. President Roosevelt encloses a copy of the letter he sent to Representative Theodore E. Burton. So he did not only send this to Newlands, he also sent this to a number of other people as well. So by following this train, you can see that this is an issue that he was really talking to a lot of people about, thought was very important, and can help follow those threads of conversation as well, even into a much broader search.
If I could jump in here real quick, something that we haven't really talked about yet. Say you're browsing these items and you see something about the Newlands Reclamation Act or a topic like that, and you don't know what that topic is. We, in addition to these primary sources, we do have an online encyclopedia and a blog, and so it's very possible that we have something like that that will help you teach what that topic is. I thought of that because I know we have something about the Newlands Reclamation Act. So if there's something that you don't know about, hopefully you can learn some more in that online encyclopedia, which we are actively working to add to currently. Maybe we don't. Maybe it was a blog post. It's in there somewhere. I would have to pull up the link. But the point stands that in many cases you will be able to find secondary interpretive information about the topics that you will find in the digital library. Yeah, it is a blog post.
It's a blog
there
post.
It is.
Yeah, and that's another thing that makes us unique is that we have both the primary sources and content and secondary interpretive content. We have some timelines, I think, and some different GIS mapping that people have done. Maybe this is a good time for me to shout out our internship program because our interns have made a lot. I see Rachel, former intern, making a face because she knew I was going to bring her up. We also have Allie Hecht, who now works, they both are working with the Presidential Library now. At the Theodore Roosevelt Center, we have Gemma Kuntz, who is not able to be with us in person, but is answering questions in the chat. And I myself am a former intern, so that's a program that we are incredibly proud of. Our interns go on to do great things. I guess that sounds biased since I am one and I think I'm doing a great thing. But many of our interns are just do really great work, and we're really proud of all of them. And they also are how we were able to catalog a vast majority of those 90,000 documents that are now published. Every year we have 8 of them publish our things and catalog our things. So a lot of the work that you see on the website is theirs. We don't put our names to the individual things we catalog, but it's very important to shout them out whenever we can.
And this is a remote internship program with global participants. We've had people from Australia, from all over the place. So it's pretty amazing. So we've mentioned him a few times. I think it's probably time to talk about Teddy Crombie.
This is another example of the way that the digital library has kind of revolutionized how research can be done. Teddy Crombie, Richard Joseph, he went by Teddy, was a big fan of Theodore Roosevelt. He was a boy, and he wrote him a couple times. And the thing I think the thing all of us love about Theodore Roosevelt is just how he wanted to connect with the people. And so this 12-year-old boy wrote Theodore Roosevelt in 1912 about how he wanted to join the Boy Scouts, and Theodore Roosevelt wrote back, which I think is just amazing. This is the second letter. Crombie wrote him several times. The first letter, Roosevelt said, hey, when I'm on the campaign, he was from Pompey's Pillar, Montana, which is not too far from here. He actually had family and relatives in Dickinson. So in the letter, he says, oh, yeah, this guy is, I don't remember the exact guy, some banker in town, that's my uncle or something like that. And so he's saying, these are people that you might have known when you were out in the Badlands. But so the letter, this is a letter that actually you will be able to see this afternoon. The Theodore Roosevelt has the physical copy of the letter that Erik had pulled up, which is the second letter that Teddy wrote to Teddy, TR.
Yes,
Hope he doesn't get mad at me for
If I can
calling
jump
him
in
that.
here for just a second, Kelly, the
Yes.
reason we like to show these off is because it's a prime example of sort of reuniting those chains of correspondence that we talked
Yes.
about before. So, as Kelly said, we've got 3 of these letters in our own collections here at Dickinson State University at the Theodore Roosevelt Center. Like I said, our collections are not big, but we have a couple items. We've got those 3 items. This letter here, which, as Kelly said, is the second one in the sequence. Going over to the related items, we've got this one as well, responding back. So we've got 3 pieces of material in our collections, but we did not have the original one, the one that started this whole chain. That one is at the Library of Congress. Now, if we did not have the digital library, if somebody wanted to find this whole chain of correspondence, they'd have to both come here to DSU and go to the Library of Congress, which is a very long trip. But thankfully, as I will turn it back over to Kelly, because we have it, we can.
We have reunited them digitally, is the end of that story.
Yes.
But so this is the original letter, the one that we do not have, that is at the Library of Congress. He's talking about how he wants to see Roosevelt, missed him on his last trip because he lives too far out of town. So it's just a really fun letter. I personally tend to like Theodore Roosevelt's letters to kids. There's another one in our collection somewhere where a little girl writes and asks him, what kind of animal is a unicorn? You've been to Africa, you might know. And he writes back and says, it's a fictional animal. It's not real.
No fun. No fun
yes,
at all.
Yes, but he does like to write back to people. So in the known persons database that William was talking about, we have those people too. We have ordinary people. And they wrote to him a lot. And so you can see the response then, I think, is the top related item, Erik, to this letter?
Not
No.
this time.
Oh,
It's going to be a time for questions here in just a
Yes.
moment, although I do want to jump in. So one of the things you'll notice here, Erik, if you'll scroll back up just a little, where I can see both letters at the same time. So you'll notice one of these is grayscale and one of them is full color. So that one from the Library of Congress that's grayscale, that's because that's one of those ones that was microformed. And then the one that's in full color was actually photographed overhead to digitize it. So that's an example of how those different methods of preservation have been used, but they all end up together as we ingest and catalog them. So I just thought that would be interesting to point out.
yeah.
Ready for questions, are we?
I think so. If anyone
All
has
right.
questions, if you want to look
I
up an
believe,
info.
Dr.
Mike is-
Cullinane is going to run the, Mike is
Can
going
I
to
just
run the
take
mic.
a brief moment to say that William, Kelly, and Erik are the beating heart of the Theodore Roosevelt Center. And for those of us that use the digital library, it's down to them. I mean, the interns are there, but they're very modest as well. And what they're not saying is that every day they get up, they show up, and they get to doing a job, which can be quite tedious sometimes, cataloging, putting descriptions in, and yet steadfastly they're at it every day. And I would just like a round of applause if we could for them.
Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah. So I just wanted to thank you for the presentation. That was fantastic. I'm probably one of the bigger users of the digital library over the last 7 years. I've been engaged in a 7-year project focused exclusively on Theodore Roosevelt, and I've been on it hundreds and hundreds of days, I would say, and I've searched for thousands and thousands of documents. And I never would have engaged in this project if it hadn't been for the digital library. I've been to many of these other archives. I've traveled, like you said, it's a long distance to go, but, so I just wanted to personally thank you, because it really is an exceptional tool. I've got one quick question, but I wanted to let everybody know that number 11 on the map that was up there is Dwayne Junt. And this is Dwayne Junt, if you're wondering. I'm
Yes,
sitting
one of
next
our
to
private
the number
collectors
11 on the
and
map.
great friends.
So I'm very proud of that as well. So the question I have is more
Dwayne-
technical.
Sorry, Dwayne has also worked with us on
Oh, yes.
digitizing the Theodore Roosevelt Association Journal, which is, they have graciously helped us make available on our website. So just a shout out to Dwayne, great guy, does great work.
Absolutely. So my question is more of a technical one, and since I've been going at this for 7 years, I'm always worried that I'm going to miss out on new stuff that's been added to the digital library. So I'm wondering if there's an easy way to say if I've gone a year without accessing certain things to see a listing of what has been added by date it was added so that I can make sure that I'm not missing anything?
Long-term is a little more difficult. That's the sort of thing where you'd probably have to contact us about, and we have those lists internally, and we can get those to you. Day-to-day, though, or week-to-week, I should say, new items that publish are highlighted down here at the bottom of our website. So recently added records, you can see we've got a couple just there, but then you can see all recently added records. That's all within the last week. You can tell we had a little bit of a busy week to try and hit that 90,000 number. We published over 800 this last week. But that week to week, those will show you the newest records that have been published. Longer than that, like I say, if you give us a call, give us an email, we have those internally, and we can let you know.
How do you handle undated materials?
Microphone on?
How do you handle undated materials?
Detective work when possible is the short answer. Sometimes, from having worked with these materials so long, we can kind of get a sense of when something might be, and so we can try to make an estimate. But generally, date ranges.
Right, so if we're fairly sure about a year, we'll put in a year, but then we'll say there's some uncertainty about that year, so it'll appear with a question mark. If we can get a date range, we'll put in the date range, as Kelly said. Sometimes we have to put in unknown date, but we know kind of like very broadly. Here you can see one of the search criteria we have is period, and so period of Roosevelt's life, and that's kind of broken out to, as you can see, ancestry, anything before 1858, before he was born, youth, when he was assemblyman, Dakota rancher, say when he's on a safari, anything after he died. So if we're able to put it into one of those periods, that can help kind of categorize it. Sometimes we just have to say unknown.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how do you handle illegible? You're dealing with a lot of handwritten items, it seems. How do you handle illegible writing? I
Oh,
mean,
tell them about the unknown shorthand notes.
Yeah, we have about 1,000, that might be an exaggeration, that might not, of shorthand notes. No, we can't read that style of shorthand. And so we have a lot that we just say unknown shorthand note. We're hoping someday, somehow, we will be able to decode it. But otherwise, in terms of handwriting, we do the best we can, is the short version. A lot of question marks where we can't read words. Yeah, there's one of the many unknown shorthand notes. Yeah, but in terms of handwriting, we have what William calls the naughty list of
naughty
certain
list.
people who we know, okay, just pray you can get enough of it to get some information down. TR sister Bammy is a notorious member of the naughty list.
Which is unfortunate because so much of the correspondence of TR's life is with
Yes.
is with Bammy.
But one of the great things about having worked here as long as I have, this is my 5th year, you get to know the handwriting. And so every year I can read a little bit more of the illegible stuff. And we do transcribe that for people. It's not available on the front-facing part of our website yet, but if you can't read something and reach out to us, we'll get that to you.
We're working to make those transcriptions available in the future. Yeah, as Kelly said, you get a sense for people's handwriting. Henry Cabot Lodge is another one with terrible handwriting. I had a researcher email me a couple years back, just, hey, I'm writing something about Henry Cabot Lodge. I can't read these letters. Can you help? And I was able to help transcribe those just because I've worked with them for a little bit. You puzzle out the words you can figure out, and then The context usually helps you figure out some other ones. We all collaborate really closely. We've got, the team's messages where we can take a picture of a word and say, I think this says this, I don't know. What do you think? So we all work really closely together to try and figure those out.
Yeah, and it's important to do that detective work. So Henry Cabot Lodge, one of these people we've mentioned a couple of times, if you don't know, was a Republican senator from Massachusetts, and both one of TR's closest personal friends and one of his closest political allies. So a lot of their correspondence is sort of mixed. It's got both personal and political and government and those kinds of things in it. So we work really hard to make sure we can read those things. I also wanted to talk a little, again, about the undated, the detective work that we do. So a lot of times specific events or things that are going on are mentioned, and you can figure out a date or at least a date range from that. But also, Kelly, you accidentally became an expert of who was a cabinet member when, and that helped you determine that.
I was an expert for a while. Some of the knowledge has faded a little bit of the cabinet members in 1907, because that is when I was cataloging. And so he switched particularly secretaries of the Navy a lot. And so I could kind of tell if there was a reference to Secretary Long, I kind of could date it a little bit. And so that's just by virtue of us, our interns, other catalogers working with the material so much and becoming intimately familiar with it that really helps us catalog it.
We get to know Roosevelt and his close friends really well.
Yes. And Erik has pulled up an example of Henry Cabot Lodge of the naughty list.
You can tell there are some quite legible parts, and then there are some words that it's like, not quite sure what that one says.
Yes. And actually, Henry Cabot Lodge, I like to think that it's partially because it's for posterity. He published 2 volumes of his correspondence with TR. And so we sometimes have to go to those to be able to read the originals.
We get a bit of a cheat sheet sometimes. Not all
Which
the
has
time.
helped us learn his handwriting.
Lodge edited his letters, so
Yes.
some of the juicy details are left out in the published books. So we still have to try and read the whole letter itself to find out all the details.
Is artificial intelligence something you'll be able to use to take care of that handwriting illegibility?
Not yet, at the very least. I know there have been a lot of people interested in that. When we show the really difficult things, it's just not there yet. And because there are so many people writing to Roosevelt, a lot of Roosevelt's materials, as William said, are typed. So Roosevelt's things themselves he had good handwriting, they were typed. His materials are fine. But there are so many people writing to him and the various different handwriting styles, I think that probably presents a challenge. Maybe one day it could get there. Being able to provide more transcriptions to people, I don't think would be bad at all. But there are some definite challenges.
And on top of the handwriting itself, there's the issue of the scans themselves that makes it difficult for AI. So the scans often have bleed through where you can see the reverse side or another page and things like that. And any sort of OCR AI technology that's trying to read words, it will get confused by that bleed through. And so that's a challenge we come up against quite frequently when we're attempting to test AI for those things.
You can see that a little bit on this letter. So we've got the main words that Lodge is writing, but then we've got some vertical ones coming through on the back because you don't want to waste paper. You write on the back, you've got this thick, heavy ink. It bleeds through.
Yes. You mentioned the presidential library, and I was wondering if you would talk a little bit about your relationship with them and also how collaborations and what differences there are.
Mike, would you like to join us for a second to talk a little about
Yes,
that? I
Mike.
hate to put you on the spot, but
Well, I mean, as you can see today, we've got, the Presidential Library is sponsoring the streaming. We have a very similar mission. We've got 2 employees of the Presidential Library here with us today, including, actually 3, I should say, and 4. Well, yes, that's right. So we have 4. So, I mean, we collaborate often. I think most recently we've been collaborating on things like collections management. So the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library has recently acquired a number of fabulous collections. One that we're going to be doing a show and tell of later on today, which is the Edmund and Sylvia Morris collection. and the senior curator for the Presidential Library is here today as well. So they're stored at DSU, but they are processed and they are acquired by the Presidential Library. So we have a collaborative relationship because we have a similar mission. And I mean, that's not only true for the Presidential Library, but it's true for a number of other groups as well. So the Theodore Roosevelt Association, which is the longest, the oldest memorial association. And all of those dots that William had on the map, in a sense, is a partner and collaborator. I think, not in a sense, they are partners and collaborators, whether it's private donors, whether it's collecting institutions like the Library of Congress. So, but we can talk more about that if you like it. I think the Q&A, when you can look at some of the materials that the Presidential Library is going to be showcasing. And feel free to ask Sue Sarna, who is the senior curator, collections curator at the Presidential Library. And also we have Matt Briney, who is the head of communications for the Presidential Library. So, and we're also going to have a panel discussion next with one of the program administrators of the Presidential Library. So you're gonna be able to ask loads of questions from them. But we'll just say that we have partners with many places, and we're really excited about this huge new library that's going in, and I can't wait to see more of what's going to come of that.
Yeah, we're working really closely with them. I hope I'm not out of line. I've heard it described this way. The Presidential Library is focused on learning from TR, and we kind of view ourselves as learning about TR. Is that a reasonable-ish thing to say?
Thumbs up from Matt in the back.
All right.
Okay, good.
And what I'll say is, and I think the man himself would approve of this, more TR is always better. And so any partner organization, anybody who helps with our mission of learning from and about TR, we really like and are really excited to collaborate with everybody.
Yeah, all of our partners are really important to us, and it's amazing how many people reach out to us with that same goal of doing this good historical work and making these sources available to everyone. So just in the past couple of years, one of my favorite collections that we've put on our digital library is the Sherman Grinberg Film Collection. So a private film library, privately owned film library in Hollywood reached out to us, and they were reaching out to presidential sites across the country. They have newsreel collections, and so they were making sure that these presidential sites had this high definition, professionally restored newsreel and film footage of the respective presidents for those sites because they wanted researchers and others to be able to use them. We have so many relationships like that that we're really, really grateful for, and allows us to really enhance what we do as well. So,
I'm representing one of the older generations in the audience, and this is sort of a darker question, but after all the work that you've done, how in the devil do you anticipate or prevent thievery or disappearance of what you've accumulated? Is there an answer? And if you give it to me, I won't understand it.
As far as the disappearance, when the project was started, it was evaluated like what are the best sorts of file formats, what are the most stable, so when we get digitized items, they come to us as TIFF files, really high definition files, really stable. So those are our archival files, and then from there we downscale them a bit to put them up on the website. Just if we put the TIFFs up, it would probably take a long time to load. But we have that archival collection of items stored in I believe an NDUS server. As far as the data and things getting stolen, we hope people cite us when they're using our materials, our descriptions, and things like that. But the honest answer is we're an open digital library. Anyone is able to use what we have. All the items that we publish are in the public domain. If people want high definition files, if they contact us, we provide whatever we're able.
and this goes back to our partners as well, right? We point people back to our partners for
Yes.
even more things. So like, Harvard has some things that we don't have yet, or they'll have slightly related things, and we'll point people to those partners. And so we try to build a really strong network of organizations and individuals where we all share this and share it with everyone else. That's really important to us.
I had a question about, this is wonderful that we have this resource for Theodore Roosevelt, one president. I'm wondering are there other similar centers that are focused on other presidents? So I'm thinking Woodrow Wilson or Franklin Delano Roosevelt, William McKinley. Is anything like that happening? How unique is this as it being for Theodore
Kelly's
Roosevelt?
about to brag
yeah.
on us here.
Yeah, I threatened these guys when we just started planning this to give a TED talk about how unique and wonderful this resource is that we have all worked on and are still working on building. We are the only comprehensive digital library for presidents. And so no one else is doing this. I think they should. That's why I'm here. I wish that everything could be linked like this. Now, more modern presidents have digital libraries, physical ones, or physical libraries, not digital libraries. I'm sorry, I love digital libraries too much. But like Lyndon Johnson, for example, the vast majority of his papers are all in one place. They're not digitized that I know of, but it's easier. You don't have to travel all over the country the same way you do as earlier presidents where things are kept in different places because they were involved in building them. Harry Truman comes to mind as another one who was really involved in the making of his own. But there are other presidential papers projects, Abraham Lincoln.
We're kind of inspired
Yes,
by
yeah,
when we were
and
founded.
digital Monticello with Thomas Jefferson. So there are similar, but not on our scale. And very few people do what we do in terms of what we call item level cataloging that I think, William, you brought up, describing every individual item. I go to conferences of other archivists and people who do this, and the fear in their eyes when I tell them we are doing item level description, it's extremely uncommon. And I think it's what makes me very proud to work here and proud of this resource.
Yeah, we would like to be a model for
Yes.
what other presidential sites should do. Just to jump back, something that I didn't mention earlier and I meant to, that's sort of part of this is Theodore Roosevelt lived and died long before the presidential library concept as we know it existed. So that's some of the reason, the more modern presidents, they were involved in collecting their papers in a more organized way than TR was. So that's the reason
Yeah.
stuff's scattered.
Yes, and I don't think there were quite as many locked boxes that had to be broken into to even get the papers there. Just the concept of a presidential library and an archive in that way has evolved over time.
I think we've got
Yeah.
time for maybe one more question.
Maybe
then.
one more, yeah. Okay.
Just real quickly, my great aunt went to business college in Fargo and she had to learn several different kinds of shorthand. So my thought is that I ask if you've considered asking the State Historic Society of North Dakota's library about different versions of shorthand that they might have. Their librarian is outstanding, or I think it's a previous business college in Fargo, their collections might be at NDSU's library.
I don't think we've reached out to the North Dakota Historical Society about that. That's a good thought. Most of the people that we've talked to about shorthand, though, who know shorthand say, I know shorthand, but I don't know that.
Yeah.
So, but that's a good lead to check out, and I think we'll definitely have to.
And, yeah,
have
and
to
we do
ask
have a
them.
good relationship with them. I'm working with them right now to hopefully get the papers of the Marquis de Moras in our digital library. We're hoping that can happen. We're not 100% sure. If you know about TR's time in this region, you've heard of the Marquis de Moras. So we do have a relationship with them, and they may be able to help us. Thank you for that suggestion.
We just please give a round of applause to these three amazing archivists and catalogers.